What would you do if a bleeding stranger collapsed at your door in the dead of night? Under the flickering glow of a storm-soaked evening, a mysterious figure stumbled onto Samuel Carter's sprawling Montana ranch, his tattered military fatigues drenched in mud, his breaths ragged like those of a hunted animal. Samuel, a weathered rancher with a heart hardened by loss, gripped his trusty shotgun, his pulse racing as the man fell to his knees, whispering, "Please, help me." A crack of thunder shook the sky, and Samuel froze. Should he risk everything for this unknown soldier? Little did he know, by morning, black vans and armed men would swarm his land, turning his quiet life into a battlefield of courage and betrayal. If you were Samuel, would you act fast or hold back? Comment 1 to help immediately, or 2 to hesitate and think twice. Don't miss a single gripping tale. Hit that like button and subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories for more stories that challenge your heart and mind. The dawn broke over Samuel Carter's 300-acre ranch, casting golden hues across fields that had been in the Carter family for 3 generations. At 60, Samuel's steps were slower now, each one heavy with the weight of decades spent tending to this land. Every fence post, every winding creek, every rolling hill was etched into his memory like a map of his life, a life that had not been kind in recent years. His beloved wife, Eliza, had succumbed to illness 6 years prior, leaving him alone in the grand ranch house his grandfather had built with his own hands. Their only daughter, Emily, had joined the military a decade ago, her letters sparse and cryptic, her calls brief and filled with phrases like, "I can't tell you much, Dad." The ranch itself was struggling, for years of relentless drought had scorched his crops, and the bank's letters about unpaid loans grew more threatening by the month, each one a dagger to Samuel's pride. He had even begun to consider the unthinkable, selling a piece of his family's legacy to survive. Despite these hardships, Samuel was known in the tight-knit community of Willow Creek as a man of unwavering integrity. He'd been the first to lend a hand when the Johnson silo collapsed last summer, hauling timber through the blistering heat to help them rebuild. He still drove fresh vegetables to elderly neighbors too frail to travel, leaving baskets on their porches with a quiet nod. A man's worth is in what he does when no one's looking, his father had always said, and Samuel lived by that creed, his actions a testament to a moral compass that never wavered. Few knew of his own military past. A faded photograph in his office showed a younger Samuel in jungle fatigues during the Vietnam War, a small box of medals tucked away in a drawer, never spoken of. He didn't wear his service on his sleeve. It was a quiet part of him, a chapter he rarely revisited, though the scars of those years lingered in the lines of his weathered face. The storm had raged all night, a relentless fury of wind and rain that drove Samuel to check his barn and stables, ensuring the livestock were secure. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, illuminating the ranch in ghostly flashes as he trudged through the mud, his boots sinking into the sodden earth. The air was thick with the scent of rain and wet hay, the kind of night that made the world feel smaller, more dangerous. A strange noise stopped him cold, a scraping sound, followed by a faint thud, barely audible over the howling wind. He froze, his breath catching in his throat, the rain soaking through his coat as he strained to hear. Then, a muffled cough pierced the silence, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. Heart racing, Samuel eased open the barn door, his flashlight slicing through the darkness like a blade. At first, nothing seemed amiss among the hay bales and rusted tools, the familiar shapes of his barn offering a false sense of security. Then, a shadow shifted in the corner, and Samuel's grip tightened on the flashlight. "Who's there?" Samuel called, his voice gruff as he reached for the old crowbar he kept by the door, its cold metal a reassuring weight in his hand. Silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, until a strained voice answered, "I'm not armed. I just need shelter." Samuel's flashlight beam found the source, a man in tattered military fatigues, crouched between hay bales, clutching his left shoulder where blood seeped through the fabric, staining it a dark, ominous red. His face was pale, etched with exhaustion, a scruffy beard framing sharp, vigilant eyes that darted toward every creak of the barn. "You're hurt," Samuel said, lowering the crowbar, his voice softening despite the fear prickling his spine. "It's nothing," the man lied, his grimace betraying the pain that twisted his features. "You military?" Samuel asked, noting the man's rigid posture, the way his gaze scanned the shadows despite his injury, a soldier's instinct that never slept. A pause hung heavy in the air, the storm outside roaring like a beast. "Nathan, just call me Nathan," the man said, dodging the question, but his straight-backed stance, even while wounded, told Samuel all he needed to know. In Nathan's eyes, Samuel saw a familiar haunt, the same hollow vigilance he'd seen in his own reflection after Vietnam. The look of a man who'd witnessed horrors that couldn't be unseen, a look that stirred memories Samuel had long buried. "I'm on a mission," Nathan added, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "That's all I can say." Samuel nodded slowly, his gut telling him to trust this stranger, though his mind screamed caution. A memory flickered to life, unbidden and vivid, pulling him back to a humid jungle in Vietnam. He was 22 again, the air thick with the stench of fear and gunpowder, his squad ambushed under a moonless sky. He dragged a wounded comrade, Private Daniels, through the mud for miles, whispering, "I won't leave you," as bullets whizzed past. Daniels had survived because of Samuel's stubborn refusal to abandon him. Now, staring at Nathan, that same instinct roared to life, a soldier's code that refused to die, even after all these years. "Come inside," Samuel said, extending a hand, his voice firm with resolve, though his heart trembled with the weight of his choice. "Let's get that shoulder fixed." Inside the ranch house, Samuel worked methodically, wrapping Nathan's shoulder with bandages from his well-stocked first aid kit, the scent of antiseptic sharp in the air. The wound was a graze, not a direct hit, but the blood loss worried him, the crimson stains on the bandage a stark reminder of the stakes. "This needs stitches," Samuel grumbled, securing the bandage with tape, his hands steady despite the tremor of unease in his chest. Nathan sat stiffly at the kitchen table, now dressed in Samuel's spare clothes, a faded plaid shirt and jeans that hung loose on his lean frame, the fabric smelling faintly of cedar from the closet. "It's fine. Thank you," Nathan said, his eyes flicking to the windows, scanning the darkness beyond as if expecting shadows to come alive, his every movement laced with a soldier's paranoia. Samuel's hands paused as he packed away the supplies, a wave of doubt crashing over him like the storm outside. What had he just done? This man could be a fugitive, a criminal, and here he was, bandaging him up in the middle of the night, risking everything, his home, his legacy, his safety. But then he thought of Emily, his daughter, out there somewhere in a uniform like Nathan's, fighting battles he couldn't imagine. If she were hurt, alone, would he want someone to turn her away? The thought twisted his gut, a pang of longing and fear that made his decision feel both reckless and right. He pushed the doubt aside, pouring 2 mugs of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and slid one across the table to Nathan. "My ranch, my rules," Samuel said gruffly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I deserve to know what kind of trouble you're in." Nathan's jaw tightened, his fingers wrapping around the mug as if drawing strength from its warmth, the steam rising like a ghost between them. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate, each word heavy with the weight of truth. "I'm with a special operations unit. That's all I can say officially." He glanced at Samuel, his eyes searching, as if gauging whether he could trust this stranger who'd taken him in. "Unofficially, I've uncovered something dangerous. Evidence of corruption at the highest levels, illegal arms deals, contract fraud, things that could topple powerful people, people who'd kill to keep their secrets buried." Samuel's brow furrowed, his mind racing as he tried to process the words. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy thriller, the kind of story you'd scoff at over a beer at the local diner. But the raw fear in Nathan's eyes, the way his voice dropped to a whisper, made it all too real. "And these people, they shot you?" Samuel asked, his voice steady but his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. "They tried to do worse," Nathan replied, his tone grim, his gaze distant as if reliving the horror. "My team was ambushed. I'm the only one who got out with the evidence." Their conversation was cut short by a sharp, beeping sound, a jarring intrusion that made Samuel's heart leap into his throat. Nathan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device, a specialized GPS tracker, its screen glowing with a faint red light. "What's that?" Samuel asked, his stomach knotting with dread, the warmth of the coffee turning to ice in his hands. "Secure tracker," Nathan said, his face darkening as he studied the screen, his fingers tightening around the device. "My handler checks my position. They've found me. They'll be here soon." A chill ran down Samuel's spine, the air in the kitchen suddenly heavy with the weight of impending danger. "Who's they?" he demanded, his voice rising with a mix of fear and frustration, the storm outside seeming to mirror the chaos within. "They'll look official, government agents, maybe military, but they're not who they seem," Nathan said, his eyes locking onto Samuel's, his voice urgent and pleading. "They're part of the conspiracy. I know it sounds insane, but I swear, I'm trying to protect this country, not destroy it." Samuel ran a hand through his graying hair, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a physical force, his mind a battlefield of doubt and resolve. "You're putting my ranch, my whole life, in danger," he said, his voice trembling with the realization, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "I know," Nathan replied, genuine regret in his tone, his shoulders slumping under the burden of his words. "I'll leave before dawn. I just needed a safe place for the night." Samuel finished the thought for him, his voice softening, a flicker of empathy breaking through his fear. "A safe place. I can give you that." Later that night, Samuel jolted awake, his heart racing as hushed whispers drifted down the hallway, the sound foreign in the stillness of his home. He crept out of bed, his bare feet cold against the wooden floor, each creak of the house amplified in the silence. He edged toward the living room, his breath shallow, his pulse thundering in his ears. Nathan was there, speaking into a small communication device, his voice urgent but low, as if afraid the walls might betray him. "I have the files. They're secure," Nathan said, pausing to listen, his face tense in the dim light of a single lamp. "Carter Ranch, 50 miles west of Willow Creek. I can't stay. This civilian's already risked too much." Another pause, then, "Understood. Carter out." Samuel stepped into the room, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Carter? You used my name. Who were you talking to?" Nathan spun around, startled, his hand instinctively reaching for the device, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and guilt. "My commanding officer. The only person I still trust," he said, his voice steady but his eyes wary, searching Samuel's face for a reaction. Samuel's doubts roared back to life, a tidal wave of suspicion that threatened to drown his resolve. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "For all I know, you're the criminal here," he snapped, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Nathan hesitated, then slowly reached into his pack, pulling out a small metal case, the kind used to store sensitive equipment. He opened it, revealing a digital storage device glowing with a faint blue light, its hum a quiet menace in the stillness. "This has everything," Nathan said, his voice low and urgent, each word a plea for belief. "Names, dates, transactions, proof of treason. I need to get this to Colonel Daniel Matthews at the Pentagon. He's leading the investigation." Samuel studied Nathan's face, searching for any sign of deception, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, fear, doubt, and a flicker of hope that this man might be telling the truth. If Nathan was honest, he was a hero, risking everything for justice. If he was lying, Samuel had just invited disaster into his home, a disaster that could cost him everything he'd ever fought for. "If this is real, why didn't you go straight to the authorities?" Samuel asked, his voice tight with suspicion, his eyes narrowing as he searched for cracks in Nathan's story. "Because the authorities are compromised," Nathan explained, his tone urgent, his words tumbling out in a rush. "The same people who want this evidence gone have operatives everywhere, in every agency, every corner of power. That's why I need to reach Matthews directly, face to face." As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, a low hum filled the air, a helicopter, flying fast and low over the western ridge, heading straight for the ranch like a predator closing in on its prey. Nathan spotted it first, his body tensing as he moved away from the window, his movements quick and precise, a soldier's instinct kicking in. "They're here," he said, his voice tight with fear, his hands trembling as he gathered his meager belongings. Samuel peered out at the driveway, his heart sinking as a cloud of dust signaled approaching vehicles. Multiple black vans, moving with military precision, their engines a low growl that sent a shiver down his spine. "They're coming from the road too," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper as dread coiled in his gut, the reality of his choice crashing over him. Nathan grabbed his belongings, his movements frantic, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "I need to go now." "Wait," Samuel said, making a split-second decision that felt both reckless and right, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "There's a hidden cellar behind the bookshelf in my study. My father built it during the Cold War. It leads to a tunnel that exits near the old oak grove, half a mile from here." Nathan stared at him, surprise flickering in his eyes, a glimmer of hope breaking through his fear. "Why are you helping me this much?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion, his gaze searching Samuel's face for an answer. Samuel's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening like steel, his eyes burning with a quiet fire. "Because if you're telling the truth, you're fighting for something bigger than both of us. And I learned a long time ago, we don't abandon our own." Nathan nodded, a newfound respect in his gaze, his shoulders straightening as if bolstered by Samuel's words. "I need you to hold on to this," he said, pressing the metal case into Samuel's hands, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his touch. "If anything happens to me, get it to Colonel Matthews. Promise me." Samuel took the case, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. As Nathan disappeared into the study, the bookshelf sliding shut behind him with a soft thud. Samuel stashed the case in an old tin box where he kept his Vietnam medals, the metal cold against his fingers, the faint scent of rust mingling with the memories of war. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was coming, then turned to face the approaching storm, his heart a drumbeat of fear and determination. As Nathan slipped into the tunnel, the faint sound of barking dogs echoed through the morning air, growing louder with each passing second, their growls a menacing promise of pursuit. Samuel's heart pounded as he imagined Nathan crawling through the narrow, earthen passage, the walls damp and claustrophobic, the scent of soil heavy in the air, roots brushing against his shoulders like skeletal fingers. What if the tunnel had collapsed over the years, trapping Nathan in a tomb of earth? What if the dogs picked up his scent too soon, leading the agent straight to him? Samuel shook off the thoughts, forcing himself to focus, his jaw clenched with determination. He had to buy Nathan time, no matter the cost, even if it meant facing down the men who now swarmed his land. Samuel stood on his porch, his breath visible in the crisp morning air, as 6 identical black vans formed a semicircle around his ranch house, their engines idling with a low, ominous hum. Men in dark suits emerged, their movements precise and coordinated, a stark contrast to the chaos Samuel felt inside, their polished shoes crunching on the gravel with a sound that set his nerves on edge. This wasn't local law enforcement. These men carried the weight of authority, or at least the appearance of it, their faces hard and unreadable. A tall man with slicked-back gray hair stepped forward, his presence commanding, his eyes cold and calculating as they surveyed the ranch, assessing it not as a home, but as a battlefield. "Mr. Samuel Carter," the man called, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade, each syllable dripping with authority. "I'm Agent Grayson with the National Security Agency. We need to speak with you now." Samuel wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans, descending the porch steps with a calmness he didn't feel, his heart hammering against his ribs like a war drum. "What can I do for you, Agent Grayson?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides, his hands trembling slightly as he shoved them into his pockets. Grayson closed the distance between them, his smile as cold as the morning frost, his eyes glinting with a predator's focus. "We're tracking a dangerous fugitive, a military deserter who stole classified information. We believe he passed through here last night." He produced a photograph of Nathan in uniform, the image crisp and official, a stark contrast to the broken man Samuel had found in his barn. "Have you seen this man?" Samuel took the photo, his hands steady as he studied it, buying precious seconds to compose himself, his mind racing with 1,000 what-ifs. "Can't say I have," he said, handing it back, his voice calm but his pulse thundering in his ears. "I live alone, don't get many visitors out here." Grayson's eyes narrowed, his smile tightening, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "Are you sure, Mr. Carter? Harboring a fugitive is a federal offense. The consequences are severe," he said, his voice low and menacing, the threat hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Samuel met his gaze, his voice firm, though his stomach churned with dread. "Like I said, I haven't seen anyone. You're welcome to look around." Grayson nodded to his team, and they dispersed across the property with chilling efficiency, their movements a well-rehearsed dance of intimidation. 2 agents entered the house without permission, their boots thudding against the hardwood floors, the sound echoing through Samuel's chest like a physical blow. Others headed toward the barn and stables, their flashlights cutting through the early morning mist. "Quite a spread you've got here," Grayson remarked, his eyes scanning the land with a detached interest, as if calculating its worth. "Been in your family long?" "3 generations," Samuel replied, his voice tight with suppressed anger, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Shame if anything happened to it," Grayson said, the threat in his words as sharp as a blade, his smile a cruel mockery of civility. Inside the house, Samuel could hear the sounds of his life being torn apart, drawers yanked open with a screech, furniture shoved aside with careless thuds, the clatter of dishes hitting the floor as if his memories meant nothing. Each sound was a violation, a reminder of everything he stood to lose: his home, his legacy, the life he'd built with Eliza, the dreams he'd shared with Emily. But in his mind, he traced Nathan's path through the tunnel, calculating how long it would take him to reach the oak grove, the half-mile stretch feeling like an eternity. He just needed to stall a little longer, to give Nathan a fighting chance, even as his own world crumbled around him. "You were military, weren't you, Mr. Carter?" Grayson asked, gesturing toward the faded Vietnam photo visible through the window, his tone deceptively casual, a predator toying with its prey. "Vietnam. Long time ago," Samuel replied, his voice clipped, his eyes never leaving Grayson's. "Then you understand loyalty, the chain of command," Grayson said, stepping closer, his voice low and menacing, his breath visible in the cold air. "The man we're looking for has betrayed those values. He's a threat to national security." Samuel met Grayson's gaze, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, a fire igniting in his chest. "In my experience, Agent Grayson, the ones who talk the most about loyalty are usually the ones you can't trust," he said, his words a quiet defiance, a challenge that hung heavy between them. Grayson's expression darkened, his jaw tightening, but before he could respond, an agent emerged from the house, his voice urgent. "Sir, we found blood on some bandages in the bathroom trash." Grayson turned back to Samuel, a dangerous smile spreading across his face, his eyes glinting with triumph. "Care to revise your statement, Mr. Carter?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice, each word a step closer to the abyss. Samuel's mouth went dry, his throat tightening, but he held his ground, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. "I cut myself fixing the tractor yesterday," he said, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead, the weight of Grayson's gaze like a physical force. "And the fresh coffee mugs, 2 of them," Grayson mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm, his smile a cruel twist of victory. "For a man who lives alone, you seem to have a lot of company." Another agent approached, his voice sharp with urgency. "Sir, we found disturbed bedding on the couch. Someone slept there recently." Grayson's pretense of civility vanished, his face contorting with a cold fury. "Where is he, Carter? Where's the soldier?" he demanded, his voice a low growl, his hand twitching toward his jacket where a weapon undoubtedly waited. "I don't know what you're talking about," Samuel insisted, his voice steady despite the sweat trickling down his spine, his heart racing as the net tightened around him. Grayson signaled to his men, his voice a bark of command. "Search everything. Tear this place apart if you have to. Find him." As the agents swarmed the property, Samuel watched his home being desecrated, his family's legacy trampled underfoot, the sound of shattering glass and splintering would a dagger to his heart. The sound of barking dogs cut through the air. Grayson had brought K-9 units, their growls growing louder as they neared the oak grove, their noses sniffing out the scent of fear. "Those dogs will find your friend," Grayson said, his tone almost gleeful, his eyes alight with a sadistic satisfaction. "And when they do, You'll both face charges of treason. Do you know the penalty for treason, Mr. Carter? Samuel stood his ground, his hands clenched into fists, but doubt gnawed at him, a relentless whisper in the back of his mind. Had he made a terrible mistake? What if Nathan was a traitor, a liar who'd used him as a pawn in a deadly game? But as he watched Grayson direct the search with cold efficiency, Nathan's words echoed in his mind like a lifeline. They'll look official, but they don't represent the real government. The dogs were closing in on the oak grove, their barks growing frantic, a chorus of pursuit that sent a shiver down Samuel's spine. He closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer that Nathan had made it far enough, that the tunnel had held, that his sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. "Last chance, Carter," Grayson said, his hand inching toward his jacket, his voice a low growl of impatience, his eyes burning with a predator's focus. "Where is he? Where's the evidence he stole?" Samuel looked at his ranch, at the fields he'd toiled in, the house he'd shared with Eliza, the legacy he'd hoped to pass to Emily, and made his choice, his voice steady with defiance. "I don't know what evidence you're talking about," he said, his words a quiet rebellion, a stand against the darkness. "But even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you." The tension on the ranch was suffocating, a palpable force that pressed down on Samuel like a physical weight. Grayson had positioned agents at every exit, and the dogs were systematically working through the property, their barks echoing like a death knell, each one a step closer to discovery. An agent called from near the barn, his voice sharp with excitement, holding up a military-grade communication device, its sleek design a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings. "Sir, we found something." Grayson's smile was ice-cold, his eyes glinting with triumph as he turned to Samuel. "The evidence keeps mounting, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice a taunt, each word a nail in the coffin of Samuel's hope. Samuel remained silent, his mind racing, his breath shallow. The tunnel exit was half a mile away. Had Nathan made it? The dogs would pick up his scent eventually, their noses relentless in their pursuit. Then, everything shifted, a sudden change that sent a jolt through the tense air. The sound of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention to the main road, their engines a low rumble that cut through the barking of the dogs. Two black vans approached, but unlike Grayson's, these bore official military markings, their presence a stark contrast to the chaos of the NSA operation. They drove straight to the ranch entrance, ignoring the NSA checkpoint, their tires crunching on the gravel with a sound that echoed like hope. Grayson's expression shifted from triumphant to uneasy, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "Who authorized military personnel? This is an NSA operation," he barked, turning to a subordinate, his voice edged with frustration. "Get them out of here." The vehicle stopped, and uniformed military police emerged, their movements precise and disciplined, followed by a distinguished man in a dress uniform, his chest adorned with the insignia of a colonel, his presence a beacon of authority in the chaos. Samuel felt a flicker of hope, fragile but fierce, burning in his chest. Could this be Colonel Matthews, the man Nathan had mentioned, the man who held the key to this nightmare? Grayson marched toward the newcomers, his indignation palpable, his steps heavy with purpose. "Colonel, this is a classified NSA operation. Your presence here is unauthorized," he said, his voice sharp, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The colonel surveyed the scene with calm authority, his gaze steady and unflinching, a stark contrast to Grayson's barely contained rage. "Agent Grayson, I'm not surprised to find you here," he said, his voice steady, each word a quiet challenge. "Do I know you?" Grayson asked, his tone edged with suspicion, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the newcomer. "Colonel Daniel Matthews, Pentagon Special Investigations Division," the man replied, handing Grayson an official document, its seal gleaming in the morning light. "This operation is now under military jurisdiction by direct order of the Secretary of Defense." Samuel watched from the porch, his heart pounding with fragile hope, his hands gripping the railing as if it were a lifeline. If this was Matthews, then Nathan might have been telling the truth, and everything Samuel had risked might not have been in vain. Grayson scanned the document, his face paling, his composure slipping for the first time. "This is irregular. The suspect stole NSA intelligence," he protested, his voice rising, a crack in his armor of authority. Matthews cut him off, his voice sharp, his gaze hardening like steel. That's odd, because according to my information, Sergeant Nathan Brooks is part of a sanctioned military operation investigating corruption within government agencies. An Operation U, Agent Grayson, have been working to sabotage, he said, his words a quiet accusation, each one a blow to Grayson's crumbling facade. Grayson's composure slipped further, his voice rising in desperation. These are baseless accusations. Brooks is a deserter who stole classified documents, he shouted, his hands trembling with a mix of fear and rage. Interesting theory, Matthews replied coolly, his voice steady, a calm anchor in the storm. Let's test it. He nodded toward one of the military vehicles, and the door opened with a soft click, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Out stepped a military officer in full uniform, the same man Samuel had known as Nathan, now transformed, his posture impeccable, his expression professional, his uniform adorned with commendation medals that gleamed in the sunlight. Sergeant Brooks, Matthews acknowledged, his voice formal but warm, a note of pride in his tone. Your status report? Mission accomplished, sir, Nathan replied crisply, his voice steady, a soldier's discipline in every word. Evidence secured and transmitted to headquarters as of 0600 hours. Samuel stared, his breath catching in his throat, his hands trembling as he gripped the porch railing. The transformation was staggering, from the desperate, wounded man in his barn to this confident soldier standing before him, a hero in the truest sense. Grayson's hand twitched toward his weapon, his face contorted with rage. This is a setup. Brooks is a traitor, he shouted, his voice a desperate plea for control. In an instant, the military police had their weapons trained on Grayson and his agents, their movements swift and precise, a silent promise of justice. I wouldn't, Matthews warned, his voice calm but firm, a quiet authority that brooked no argument. Your operation is compromised, Grayson, just like your loyalty. Matthews turned to the military police, his voice a command that echoed across the ranch. Detain Agent Grayson and his team. Charges will include conspiracy against the United States, obstruction of a military investigation, and he glanced at the destruction on Samuel's property, his expression darkening. Unlawful search and seizure without proper warrants. As Grayson was being handcuffed, his composure shattered, his voice rising in a desperate plea. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The people I work for are everywhere, in every agency, every branch of government, he shouted, his face red with fury, his eyes wild with fear. We know, Matthews replied, his voice steady, a quiet promise of justice. That's exactly what Sergeant Brooks' operation was designed to uncover. Thanks to the evidence he secured, we now have names, dates, and transactions for every member of your network. Grayson's face twisted with rage, his control slipping away like sand through his fingers. In a desperate move, he broke free from the MP cuffing him and lunged at Samuel, grabbing him with a vice-like grip and pressing a concealed weapon to his temple, the cold metal a stark contrast to the heat of his rage. I'm walking out of here, Grayson growled, his voice a low snarl, his arm tight around Samuel's throat. Or the rancher dies right now. Everyone froze, the air thick with tension, Samuel feeling the cold metal against his skin, Grayson's arm a chokehold that made his vision blur. His heart pounded, his mind racing with thoughts of Emily, of the ranch, of the life he might never see again, a life he'd fought so hard to protect. A single shot rang out, a sharp, muted thud that cut through the silence like a thunderclap. Grayson's grip loosened, and he crumpled to the ground, a tranquilizer dart protruding from his neck, its red fletching a stark contrast to his dark suit. From the edge of the ranch house, Nathan lowered a specialized sidearm, his voice steady but filled with emotion, his eyes locked on Samuel. Sorry for the dramatic entrance, he said, approaching with careful steps, his weapon still in hand. But I couldn't let him hurt you, not after everything you've done. Samuel rubbed his neck, his hands trembling as he looked from Nathan to Colonel Matthews, his voice thick with relief, a weight lifting from his shoulders. You were telling the truth all along, he said, his words a whisper, a realization that brought tears to his eyes. Nathan nodded, his eyes warm with gratitude, a small smile breaking through his stoic facade. Every word. And thanks to you, We've got what we need to dismantle a network of corruption that's been rotting our government for years, he said, his voice steady, a soldier's pride in every word. Matthews extended his hand to Samuel, his voice sincere, his grip firm and reassuring. Mr. Carter, on behalf of the United States military, I can't thank you enough. Your courage and loyalty to your country have never wavered, even after your service ended. For the first time since the nightmare began, Samuel felt the tension drain from his body, a wave of relief washing over him like a warm tide. He had made the right choice, a choice that had saved not just Nathan, but countless others. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his porch as he sat in his old rocking chair, the wood creaking softly beneath him, watching military personnel complete their final sweep of the property. The past 24 hours felt like a fever dream, something out of an action movie he might have watched on his ancient TV, the kind of story he'd never imagined living. Colonel Matthews approached, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, the rich aroma a comfort in the chaos, and settled into the chair beside him, the silence between them companionable. Your property will be fully restored, Mr. Carter, Matthews assured him, his voice steady, a promise in every word. We've documented all damages caused by Grayson's team, and you'll be compensated accordingly. Samuel nodded, taking a sip of coffee, the warmth grounding him, the bitter taste a reminder of the reality he'd faced. I'm not worried about the property, he said quietly, his gaze distant as he looked out at the fields. I just want to understand what happened here. Matthews gazed out at the land, his expression somber, his eyes reflecting the weight of his mission. For the past year, we've been tracking a shadow network within various government agencies. They've been selling military secrets, manipulating defense contracts, crimes that undermine our nation's security. Finding them was nearly impossible. They were embedded so deeply, their roots stretching into every corner of power. Sergeant Brooks was one of our best. We sent him undercover to gather evidence. When his cover was blown, he secured the data that identified every member of the network. Names, dates, financial transactions, all of it. Grayson was their enforcer, sent to eliminate Brooks and recover the evidence, to bury the truth at any cost. Samuel shook his head, the enormity of it all sinking in, his mind struggling to grasp the scale of the conspiracy. And I just happened to be caught in the middle, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Not entirely by coincidence. Nathan's voice cut in, soft but firm, a note of warmth in his tone. He approached the porch, now dressed in civilian clothes again, a small smile on his face, his eyes bright with gratitude. When I was hiding in your barn, I saw your name on the mailbox, Carter. It clicked. It's not an uncommon name, but I remembered something. Samuel looked at him, confusion knitting his brow, his heart beating a little faster. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, a flicker of hope stirring in his chest. Nathan extended his hand, his voice warm, his smile widening as he spoke. Let me introduce myself properly. Sergeant Nathan Brooks, 5th Special Forces Group. I serve under Captain Emily Carter, he said, his words a revelation that hit Samuel like a thunderbolt. Samuel's mug froze halfway to his lips, his breath catching in his throat, his hands trembling as the words sank in. Emily, my daughter, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes wide with disbelief. Nathan nodded, his smile a beacon of light in the darkness. She's one of the best officers I've ever served under. She talks about this ranch all the time, about you, about the lessons you taught her, the values you instilled. When I realized where I was, it felt like fate, like I was meant to find you, to bring her back to you. As if on cue, another military vehicle pulled up the driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel with a sound that echoed like destiny. Samuel stood, his heart racing, his breath shallow as a familiar figure stepped out. Emily Carter, dressed in her captain's uniform, her face a mirror of Samuel's at that age, her eyes bright with a mixture of joy and relief. Dad, Emily called, her voice breaking with emotion as she strode toward the porch, her steps quick and purposeful. Samuel descended the steps, his vision blurring with tears, his heart swelling with a love he hadn't felt in years as he pulled his daughter into a fierce embrace, his arms trembling as he held her close. Emily, he whispered, his voice a choked sob, the word a prayer of gratitude. "My God, it's good to see you." Emily pulled back, gripping her father's shoulders, her eyes shining with pride, tears glistening on her lashes. "Colonel Matthews told me what happened, what you did for Nathan," she said, her voice thick with emotion, her hands steady on his shoulders. "You always taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost," she continued, her voice softening, a note of reverence in her tone. "I thought of you every time I had to make a hard call out there, every time I doubted myself. You gave me the courage to keep going, Dad, to never give up." Samuel's throat tightened, his heart swelling with a love so fierce it threatened to overwhelm him, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "I just did what I had to," he said modestly, his voice rough with emotion, his hands trembling as he touched her cheek. "No," Emily corrected, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "You did what you always do, what you taught me to do. You stood for what's right, even when it was hard, even when the odds were against you." Underscore. One month later, Samuel's ranch was transformed, a phoenix risen from the ashes of that fateful night. The damages had been repaired, the scars of Grayson's invasion erased, the mortgage paid in full, a national security grant, Colonel Matthews had called it. Though Samuel knew it was a thank you for his bravery, a debt of gratitude from a nation he'd served long ago. But the real change was in Samuel's life, a transformation that went beyond bricks and mortar. With Emily having completed her military service, she returned home to help run the family ranch, her laughter a melody that filled the house once more. Together, they installed new irrigation systems to combat future droughts, their hands working side by side in the earth, and expanded into organic crops that fetched premium prices at market, breathing new life into the land that had sustained their family for generations. But the most profound change was the new program they founded, the Homecoming Project. Using part of the Carter Ranch, they created a rehabilitation center for veterans transitioning to civilian life, a sanctuary where former soldiers could work the land, finding purpose and healing in the quiet Montana countryside. The fields that had once been a battleground now bloomed with hope, veterans planting seeds of renewal, their laughter mingling with the rustle of the wind. Nathan visited often, now a liaison between the military and the program, his bond with the Carter family unbreakable, a friendship forged in the crucible of that stormy night. What had begun as a moment of fear and uncertainty had blossomed into a legacy of hope, changing lives far beyond Samuel's wildest dreams, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness. On a warm evening 6 months later, Samuel sat on his porch with Emily and Nathan, the old rocking chair creaking softly beneath him, watching the sunset paint the fields in shades of amber and gold, the sky a canvas of beauty that took his breath away. "I never thought I'd say this," Samuel admitted, his voice soft with wonder, a smile tugging at his lips, "but I'm almost grateful for those black vans showing up." Emily chuckled, her laughter a balm to his soul, her hand resting on his arm. "Only you would see it that way, Dad," she said, her voice warm, her eyes bright with affection. Samuel gazed out at the veterans working in the distance, men and women finding peace after years of service, their hands in the soil, their hearts healing with every seed they planted. "Sometimes the darkest nights lead to the brightest days," he said, his voice thoughtful, his words a reflection of the journey he'd taken. "And sometimes a simple act of kindness can change not just one life, but countless others, in ways we could never imagine." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a soft, golden glow, Samuel Carter knew he'd found his true calling, not just as a rancher, but as a beacon of hope, helping those who'd served find their way home, just as his daughter had. His story is a powerful reminder that a single act of courage can ripple through the world, touching lives in ways we can't imagine, forging connections that heal and uplift. Have you ever shown kindness to a stranger, only to see it come back to you in unexpected ways? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how your actions changed a life, maybe even your own. Your story could inspire someone watching right now, reminding them of the power of compassion in a world that so often feels cold. This journey, from a stormy night of fear to a sunrise of purpose, shows us the strength of loyalty, the beauty of second chances, and the transformative power of compassion. Samuel's courage reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we can be a light for others, a bridge between despair and hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It's a call to stand firm in our values, to act with kindness even when the stakes are high, and to believe that hope can bloom in the most unexpected places, like a flower pushing through cracked earth. If Samuel's story moved you, don't let this moment slip away. Hit that like button now to show your support for stories that inspire. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of courage and kindness that could change the way you see the world. We're here to bring you life-changing stories every week, but we need your help to keep this community growing. Join us today, because the next story might just be the one that changes your life. At Daily Narrated Stories, we believe in the power of narratives to uplift and inspire. Let's make this journey together.